Welcome to Naresh IT Technologies. This is Mahesh. In my previous video, I explained what is web services and how many types of web services are there, what is RESTful web services and what is JSON. Like these concepts I explained in the previous video. Okay, so in this video, how to set up the web services environment we'll discuss in this today's session. Okay, so for JAX RS API, Java is providing this JAX RS API for creating the web services. And one of the implementation for this JAX RS API is Jetsi is one of the implementation. The popular implementation is Jetsi, which is given by Glassfish, and the other thing is nothing but REST-easy is another implementation which is given by JBoss. So in this video, I'm going to explain how to configure a Hello World application, let's say Hello World web services by using a Jetsi implementation we'll discuss in this video. Okay. In Eclipse, I'm creating a project. Go to File, New. Let's choose an option called Dynamic Web Project is the option I selected. Dynamic Web Project. Specify what is the project name, and specifying a project name called Second Ticket is a project name I'm creating. Second Ticket is a project name I'm creating. Now we'll continue this video. We are going to develop a small a mini project kind of thing we'll develop. Okay. The project title is nothing but Second Ticket is a project title. So if you are having any tickets like bus tickets, train tickets and all, you can upload the tickets you can upload. So second, that's why we mentioned that name as a Second Ticket is a project name I mentioned. Okay. So click on next, again click on next, and don't forget to choose an option called generate the web.xml file, because internally the RESTful web services will work on a concept called servlet. So we require this. Web.xml file is required, so choose the generate web.xml file, click on finish. You create a project we created with the name called Second Ticket is a project name we created. Now to set up the environment with Jersey, we required some jar files are required. So we had to download the Jersey jar files I had to download. For this, let's make a request in Google. Here we have two options are there. Either you can download as a jar files you can download, or otherwise if you are aware of Maven, you can configure that Maven also you can configure. So I'm taking the jar files I'm taking, we'll download the jar files, we'll add to the project build path, we'll add. I'm making a request in Google, I'm making a request. So Jersey API download is a request I'm making in Google. Jersey REST API download is a request I'm making in Google. So once if you make a request, see here we got the first thing GitHub URL we got, jersey.github.io. And this URL you can see a download link you can see for the Jersey libraries. See here we got a Jersey JAX RS 2.1 RI bundle is there. You can download this. The jar files you can download and we'll add to build path, we'll add. Otherwise you can use the Maven repository also you can use. Okay. I'm adding the jar files I'm adding. Click on this JAX RS RI bundle. So we'll download the jar files, we'll download. It's downloading one zip file. JAX RS RI 2.27 is the latest version. So it's downloading the jar files, it is downloading. Okay. So once the jar files are downloaded, we got these files we got in the form of zip format we got. We'll extract the zip file, we'll extract the zip file we extract. In my system already downloaded the JAX RS already downloaded. Okay. So once if you extract the downloaded zip file, you can see mainly three folders you can see: API, extension and lib. Basically, to set up the environment, basically we don't require all these jar files are required. I told you at the beginning only I told you we are going to develop a small mini project kind of thing we are going to develop in this video series. That's why what we'll do is nothing but we'll place all the jar files, we'll place into project lib folder, we'll place all the jar files, we'll place what we got in the API folder, extension folder, lib folder, all the jar files will place into the lib folder, we'll place our project lib folder. So under this web content folder, we'll find a folder called webinf. Under the webinf folder, we'll place the jar files, we'll place in the lib folder. We place the api.jar we placed. Next, we'll get some more files, we'll get in the extension folder, we'll get some more files. Copy all these jar files again. Place all these jar files again into which folder? Lib folder. And copy the files from lib folder also, you copy the file and place all these files into which folder? Into our project lib folder, we'll place the jar files, we'll place. and hope you are aware of this. Only if you place the jar files, if you place in the lib folder, we cannot access the classes, you cannot access from these jar files. When you can access the classes from these jar files, if you add the jar files, if you add to build path, then only you can access the classes you can access, right? So choose all these jar files, choose all the jar files, we'll add the jar files, we'll add to build path, we'll add the jar files, we'll add. So we'll find the option here called build path and choose an option called what? Add to build path is the option we'll select. So once if you choose an option add to build path, now you can access the classes, you can access from these jar files, you can access the classes. Fine, whatever the required jar files are there, we already placed all the required jar files, we placed in the lib folder, we placed all the jar files we placed. Now what we'll do is nothing but we'll create one hello world web service we'll create and we'll test that web service we'll test. So for that I'm creating under the Java resources src folder, I'm creating one package I'm creating under this src folder. Right click on the src, new, you can choose an option called package. So create a package and specifying the package name called, specify what is the package name. So I'm creating a package with the name called nit.ws is a package name I specified. nit.ws is a package name I specified, web services. So choose this finish option. Once if you select finish, we got under the src folder, we got nit.ws is a package name we got. Under this package, we'll create a Java file we'll create under this package, a new Java class. First initially what we are doing is nothing but we'll create one test class we'll create. Just we'll create a test class just to test the web service, if the web service is working or not. Okay. Then after that in the next videos, I'll explain you how to inject the data into web services. I'm creating a Java class I'm creating. Choose a class, specify what is a class name. I specified a class name called test is a class name I specified. Specify a class name called what? Test is a class name I specified. Click on finish. So we created a class we created called test is a class we created. Create a class called what? Test. Now to identify this particular class, now after the context path, I hope you are aware of what exactly context path, because the prerequisite for learning this web services is you should have a knowledge on at least servlet concept. Okay. To identify this particular class, what we have to do is nothing but we had to configure the path. There is an annotation called @path is an annotation is there. To identify this particular class, we had to configure the path we had to configure. So we configured the path called test is a path we configured. So when the request is coming from after the context path, if the request is coming from /test, invoke this particular class. That's what we specified. A problem with import, we had to import this. We had to import this annotation, we had to import @path. Right. Next after that, we'll create one method we'll create. Okay. And same like how we configured the path for the class, even for method also, we'll specify the path we'll specify and what kind of request, it's a get request or post request, what kind of input parameters you are taking and what is the response you're producing, like these kind of things we had to configure for the method. So I'm creating one method I'm creating public. The return type of this method I specified, string is the return type I specified. Just I'm creating method name called say hi is a method name I created. What's the method name? Say hi is the method name I created. The return type of this method is nothing but string is the return type we specified. So in this method, I'm returning a message I'm returning inside this method. Inside this method, I'm returning what? A string type of data I'm returning. I am working fine, you can proceed. On top of this method, you have to specify what kind of request it is. It's a get request or a post request. We are specifying it's a get request. So you have to configure at get we had to configure. It's a get kind of request, you have to configure at get is a request type you have to configure. Okay. Because we are just returning a message, we are not taking any input and all, that's why I specified it's a get request. Just we are displaying a string type of message you are displaying. And next, to identify this particular method, because a class can contain n number of methods, to identify this particular method, we had to configure, again we had to configure one path we had to configure. For example, I am specifying the path called hi is a path I specified. So to invoke this particular method, after context path you had to specify /test and hi we had to call. And what kind of message it's producing here? It's not taking any input. If you take any input parameter, we are going to use at consumes annotation. We are going to use. We'll see in the coming videos. We'll see for that at consumes annotation how to consume the data. It's producing the data it is producing, right? What kind of data it is producing here? It's a string type of data it is producing. So you can specify at produces. At produces is an annotation. You have to specify media type dot. Media type dot, it's producing the plain text it is producing here. You have to specify text underscore plain, you have to configure. Okay, let's say configure this annotation call at produces, it is producing a plain text it is producing. So done, we created the service we created on test service we created, which is returning a message called hey, I'm working fine, you can proceed. Now what we'll do is, I told you internally the Restful Web Services will work on a concept called servlet. So initially all the incoming requests first you had to configure to a servlet you had to configure. From that servlet, based on the path what you specified, will invoke that particular class and method will be invoked. So what you have to do is nothing but you don't require to create that servlet. Already Jitsi is providing that servlet class it is providing. Simply we had to configure that class, you had to configure in the web.xml, you had to configure. So you can see a web.xml file, you can see under the web content folder, you can see a web.xml file. In that web.xml file, you know that the root tag is web app by web app is a root tag. I'm configuring a servlet, I'm configuring here servlet by servlet. Configure what is the name of the servlet and what is the servlet class. I want to invoke this. Configure first servlet by servlet tag we configured. Next, configure what is the URL to invoke this particular servlet. Okay. First, what I'm configuring is the URL pattern I'm configuring here. You know, in the real-time applications, one single application will act as a web service as well as web application. In real-time applications, a single application will act as a web service as well as it will act as a web application also. To identify the request is coming to a web services, to identify that, I'm specifying the URL as /rs/star I specified. /rs/star is a request I specified, meaning we are identifying, just to identify it's a web service request. Meaning any request which is coming from the /rs, it's a web service request. Right? That's what the meaning of this statement. Any request which is coming from the /rs, it's a web service request. Why you specified the rs is nothing but I told you if you configure only /star, if you configure, you know, it's difficult to identify which one is a web service request, which one is a web application request. So to separate that, I specified /rs/star I specified. Any request which is coming from rs, it's a web service request. You know that name of the servlet you can configure, any name you can configure. I specified scnd is the name I configured, second ticket. Okay, we configured the servlet name we configured, and next we had to configure the servlet class we had to configure. I told you, right, you don't require to configure this servlet, you don't require to create this servlet class. Already Jitsi is an implementation we are using, the Jitsi implementation is providing that servlet. So simply configure this servlet container which is there in the org.clashwiz.jitsi.servlet.servlet container is a servlet class. So you had to configure this class, you had to configure as a servlet class, you had to configure. You have to configure this one as a servlet class. So all the web service requests first will go to what? The servlet container class. From the servlet container, you know, based on the path what we specified, we'll invoke that particular class and we'll invoke the particular resource or method will be invoked. Okay. So what's the next thing we had to do is nothing but we had to configure where we created the web services classes, that package name we had to configure. So that thing we had to configure in the form of init parameters. Had to configure what is a parameter name we had to configure. Had to configure the parameter name and we had to configure parameter value. So in which particular package you created this web services classes, we had to configure the package name we had to configure. So what is the package name? nit.ws is a package name we specified. The parameter value is must be the package name of your application. I mean where you created, in which package you created the web services classes. We placed in the nit.ws package, we place the web service classes we placed. The next thing is nothing but the parameter name is the first parameter. So parameter name we had to configure, this string we had to configure. the jersey.config.server.provider.packages is a name we had to configure. Let's copy it and specify this one as a parameter name we had to configure. Okay, we configured the servlet class and we configured the init parameters. We are specifying the package name we are specifying and which package we created the web service classes. And finally, we want to invoke this servlet first. So we will specify load and startup. One is a configuration I did. So we are done with our first RESTful web services. We are done. We created on test service. We created a test web services. We created on resource. One method we created called say hi. The request is coming from the /rs web service request /test. Invoke the test class /hi. Invoke this particular say hi method. We'll test this. We'll test the service. We'll test whether it's working or not. For testing, just simply right click on the project, like how you'll deploy the normal web application, the same process. Click on run on server. I'm deploying the application I'm deploying on the Tomcat server. I'm deploying the application I'm deploying. So I deployed the application I deployed on the Tomcat server. I deployed the application I deployed. So it's very basic service. It is just it's producing a message call. A say hi is it's producing a string type of message it is producing. So you can test in the browser also. You can test if it is taking any post request, any header parameters, a cookie path, like these kind of parameters. If it is taking, then it's difficult to test in the browser. At that time, for testing purpose, we can use some third-party testing tools like Postman, a SOAP UI, like these kind of testing tools we can use for testing the service. It's a very basic service. You can use in the browser also. You can test the service. You can test in browser. First thing, this is our context path. This is our project context path. After that, to identify it's a web service request, we configured request will come /rs. So I had to specify rs to specify it's a web service request. After that, to invoke the particular test class, we configured the path as test is a path we configured for the class. Invoke the test class. Next, inside the test class, we create a method called say hi is a method we created. To invoke that method, let's specify the URL called what? Hi. You got a message we got, meaning your web service is working fine. Hey, I'm working fine. You can proceed. We tested the service. We tested in the browser. We tested the service. But I told you it's a basic, very basic example it is. That's why we are able to test in the browser. But in the coming classes, we are going to see some header parameters, cookie parameters, path parameters, like different approaches. We'll see how to inject the data to the web services. For testing purpose, instead of using the browser, it's recommended to go for some third-party testing tools. One of the most popular testing tool is nothing but Postman is one of the most popular RESTful web service testing tool. Okay, so it's a free software only. You can download and you can install it. Let's start the Postman. So under this Postman, you can add as a Chrome plugin also. You can add this Postman. We want to make a new request. We want to make, so click on this plus icon. You will get a new request you can make. And what kind of request it is? It's a GET request or POST request. It's a GET request. If you want to send any header parameters, if you want to send any body, if you want to send, you can configure. Ours is very basic thing. So you can submit that URL. You can submit here. Whatever the URL you want to for our web service is there, right? This is what the URL. Copy that URL. And you can make a request. You can make from Postman also. You can make a request. I specified the URL. I specified what kind of request it is. It's a GET kind of request. And click on send. Once if you click the send button, now successfully we are able to make a request to the web services. We got the response we got in the form of a string format. We got the response we got. I'm working fine. You can proceed. So this producing the data is in which format you want to produce the data. You can configure whether you want to produce in the HTML format or string format or XML, JSON, CSV. In which format you want to produce, you can specify that. Okay. So hope you understand how to configure the environment, and we tested our first Hello World application. We tested, Hello World web service we tested, and we tested in the browser as well as Postman. It's working fine. So in the next video, I'll explain you how to inject the data to the web services. Okay. Thank you.